Hello and welcome to episode 3 of The Shift. My name is Caroline Whitney and I'm executive coach and founder of The Midlife Man. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Gyve Safavi. He's a founder who has built a business around sustainability, performance, and doing things differently. A multi-million pound business based on this, an electric toothbrush. I can't wait to hear his story. What Gabe and Mark Rushmore, his co-founder, have done is turned a pretty mundane ritual of doing our teeth, preferably twice a day, and created something that's sleek, stylish, premium, and good for the planet. They're rolling out in the UK, the US, and now planning to go further afield on a global scale. Their revenue in 2022 was 1.7 million, which was already impressive. That flew forward into 23.4 million in 2024. Needless to say, his story is an exciting one. Give is a real role model to his peers, to the next generation. He's driven, ambitious, and above all, he's really kind. I'm so impressed by him and his story, and I hope you'll be inspired with what you hear today. Let me know. Enjoy.
Gyve Safavi, welcome to The Shift. I am so excited to chat to you today. I would love to start, for anyone listening who doesn't know your story, has never met you before, if you could tell me a bit about you and what your company is all about.
So I started SURI around a little less than 5 years ago during COVID. We started, I say we, it was me, myself. I had resigned from my previous role. I'd never really taken off more than 2 weeks. And I was set on taking a long 3 months to 4 months break. But then this thing called COVID came around. Travel dreams were squashed. It became a staycation. And my wife at the time was working for a company called Facebook. They were going through this sort of massive engagement period. Everybody's at home, nothing to do, look at your phone. And she was constantly on Zoom. And I was that guy with a book in my pajamas walking around being like, oh my God, you're on the screen with 70 people. And so I just felt this vacation at home was not happening and I needed to do something with my life. And I started opening my book ideas. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so I always had this book of ideas that I would always end up writing down things that I was pretty much sure I would ever do because it didn't make sense. And so I'd end up just slowly killing my ideas as reasons not to do them, which I know many people probably can resonate with. SURI, we make electric toothbrushes and we're an oral care company, but we started with electric toothbrushes was one of those ideas. And in general, I at one point in my life, I did work at a company called Procter & Gamble on the Gillette business. For my sins, I don't shave anymore, but I sat next to the Oral-B team. And I often had feedback that they didn't want to hear about their products. And I guess that planted some of the seed. But the big sort of light bulb moment was my wife bought one of the high-end brushes, spent over 200 quid. It came in this huge box with tons of plastic. It sounded like a huge tractor when she turned it on. And I was like, hey, maybe that toothbrush idea has weight because here we are in 2020. We've got beautiful iPhones and we're in this age of design being important and this product still has not evolved and it's so expensive. And so that planted the seed. And then as I started looking further on, I came across the sort of grim fact that toothbrushes aren't recyclable. And we throw out heads or manual brushes enough to circle like over 6 billion a year globally, enough to circle the planet probably around 15 times. And so it's a close second to straws that nobody's talking about. And so around that time when I was raising our sort of pre-seed funds, my wife was pregnant with our first daughter. And I think something happens when you have a child, and it's probably a bit frightened what people say, but it's true. Like you realize, wow, my whole life now is to growing this individual and taking care of their surroundings. And you realize you start to think about other children at their age. And what am I doing is my impact and collective, and it does matter. And so I knew that if we were going to create a company, that it had to be future focused. And so a lot of the innovation we started putting into SURI, like flat-based heads, so not petroleum dependent, free recycling in the UK and the US, those sort of things that sort of early investors said was a waste of money, we thought were core to our values. And so a long-winded recap, SURI today is a modern focused oral care company that champions amazing design that is enjoyable to use, delivers an exceptional clean. That's table stakes in our category. If it doesn't clean your teeth, what's it doing? And then the last but not least, which I touched on, is pushing the boundaries when it comes to sustainability. One of the sort of quagmires I faced was we wanted to be more sustainable, but we were never going to be super sustainable if we had a battery in our product. So I was like, why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't it just be a brand that champions sustainability, makes great products, and wants to keep sustainability as one of its principles across everything it does? And so that's how we are today. We believe in great design, performance, and sustainability.
Where did that sense of instinct and believing in yourself and going for what was important to you and what you knew was needed, where did that come from?
I'll start with when it came to the product. Like I have no engineering, no product design experience, which many people were like, you went into hardware without knowing hardware. I think it was just probably naivety. It wasn't really bold. I was just like, oh, I think I could do this. But I grew up, my dad was an architect, and I grew up with a huge appreciation for a good design. And he was constantly taking me to museums, to great buildings, and showing, look, isn't it amazing? They've taken out half of the structure and curved it, and it just balances like that. I attribute that to him always getting me to consider products and how they fit in their surroundings. I was a huge fan of Apple when I was probably 6, well before Apple hit its prime. That was when Apple was actually, a lot of people were saying, you should close this company. It's not a successful company. Imagine that. And here we are today, like with their trillions of capital and products that delight people. So that kind of probably fueled a lot of my beliefs on products. Coming back to some of the influence that I had from my father, he always told me that if you're going to break the rules, you need to know the rules. He always said that if you're going to take out half the foundation of the building, you have to know foundational design and study that. And a good example is Picasso, right? So Picasso did portraits early on that were very detailed, but nobody knows them for that. They know them for the sort of abstract, beautiful portraits. But you can only do that if you know how to do the sort of foundational stuff. And so I didn't know anything about toothbrushes. I needed to learn about it. And so I did a lot of reading. I bought not my 100 toothbrushes. I took them apart. I wanted to know why they were so big and clunky, because that was something I was like, that isn't necessary. Manual brushes are thin. Electric brushes are like this. So I was like, sure, there's a motor inside it. It needs to be a certain width. When I took it apart, there was about this much padding all around. So I was going, it was that way when the motors were big, and then they got smaller, and they just said, let's keep it the same shape. And that was the hypothesis I had. And then a lot of the innovation that I was seeing, I wasn't resonating with. And often I think a lot of great entrepreneurs, as you mentioned, not saying I'm great, but in general, there's that sort of, I want it better. And this is how I want it. So I'm going to do it that way. James Dyson was like, the vacuum's terrible. I think I can do it this way. And so that's definitely true. Like you have to have an itch that you want to just do. And because that's what's going to drive you in the beginning. At one point, my wife turned around and was like, are you going to get a job? I was like, what are you going to She's like, I'm all for supporting you tearing apart toothbrushes every day. But like, where's this going? And I was like, oh, you're right. It's been a few months, hasn't it? And I'm still looking for that product designer to help me. And luckily, a lot of people responded to my cold reach outs during COVID. It must have been the time people had more free time. There wasn't so many external meetings. And so they were willing to respond. I did do a little short consulting gig, all right, because I did need cash to fund some of the prototypes we were making. But the other point I wanted to mention, and this is really important, nobody becomes an entrepreneur without it. And so my wife was supportive from day one, even though I made that joke. She was like, you go do your thing. I support it. I know it's going to be great. And I will pay the bills. I know money for a year and a half because I think this is really cool. And so my mother also supported me. She invested the first checks into the business, right? And so we were like, oh, you're not ashamed to say that. I'm ashamed. Quite the opposite, right? I'm quite proud that my family was willing to support me and my crazy idea when I had absolutely no hardware experience. And I'd put together just a beautiful deck. And
there's your dad's design and perfecting and understanding why things are the way they are and how you need to get there and learn. There's a work ethic. There's daring to do things a bit differently, but do them well. And then you've got this backing, and it's a fascinating beginning of the story. But you, before that, and you talked about your nice deck, so it brings us nicely onto something. We met about 11 years ago when you were at WPP, and that's an advertising background. That's you. I met the Gyve that was running around, excuse my French, like a bare arse fly, doing everything and anything, and the right-hand man to Sir Martin Sorrell. And I was just wowed at you because you were jetting off here, there, everywhere, organizing everything, and under a lot of pressure and learning very fast, I think. But whenever I met you, you were like a swan. You were the serene, together, collected, kind guy, like never rushing. You were being so kind and had time for everyone. What was the reality of that time in your life? And how did that role and other roles inform what you created with SURI?
Cool. That's a great question because I think a bit like how Steve Jobs always said, you have to connect the dots to see how you got to where you are and to see the path forward. I worked at P&G and then I moved to work for WP in the UK. I was in the Geneva office at P&G and I was recruited to work with Sir Martin as a chief of staff, but more formally as a business development director for Europe, Middle East, Africa. And I went from having a multifunctional team that worked with me as a brand manager at P&G to just me and him. He had 4 EEAs in the US and 2 in the UK, but I was, as you said, running around with him most of the time. And if anything needed to get done, it was probably coming to me first. And there's 300,000 people at WB at the time. So you can imagine it's quite a large organization. And you've got the CEO, me, and then there's just heads of operating companies, and maybe there's a couple other people. But there was a lot I had to learn and to figure out of that organization that was very different. And when you're working with an A+ individual or anybody at that size of a company at the top, and he's founded it, speed is of essence, but more so it's like everything needs to be done 2 days ago. And so you have to build relationships, because what I realized is I came in there and I knew I needed people to give me favors as much as possible. And obviously there's a time when people aren't, and you have to be like, the CEO's asking for this, give it to me now. And I didn't think that, and they often say that companies and the cultures they build are formed around individuals. By nature, I don't like stress, right? I don't like getting stressed out. That really upsets me. When I get stressed, I get ill. And I've seen it many times. Like I've had, even though I have some hair now and I often need to get a haircut faster than normal, I had alopecia areata. I lost a whole portion of my hair. Like things happen, and that was from stress. Like it happened right around the beginning when I started working for Sir Martin, and I wouldn't attribute it to him in terms of the stressful environment of like fast paced, need this done now. There's no time for onboarding. I replaced 2 people who were working with him on and off as a solo operator, which already holds conversation in itself. But there's other factors, right? Like and I think I was coming to the role being like, I can do anything. I'm so confident. And that is sometimes when you fall the hardest, right? When you're like, you don't even have the humility to step back and be like, oh, maybe I need to do this and that. Broke up with my girlfriend. I changed cities, started a new job, lost my entire team. Like sometimes when you're juggling balls, you got to be careful not to take out too many, because then it's just like one ball on the other one and you're not able to sequence them. And so often like and I just didn't see it. I realized too many things. Like on one hand, I've got an ex-girlfriend who's really upset with me, and I'm moving here, trying to do this, and it's all a bit, it's just too much. And I'm going to be very transparent because I think that's what people want to hear. And I had a therapist who helped me navigate some of the stuff. And sometimes when things are wrong in your life, you come and you complain, oh, work's really stressful. And they were like, is that really what it is? Do you have a life even? And I was like, do I have a what? Oh, they're like, and then, oh, there are other things happening in your life. You've moved into a very small apartment the size of a closet because you thought that's where you needed to live. And I would say, because I was calm, like that's how I projected. But sometimes I was stressed. I just didn't projecting it made me feel worse. Where some people get relief from projecting it. And a little bit of therapy helps massively. I just wanted to show that sort of to be open and transparent. But I did then go on and feel very confident in the role. And I knew what I needed to do to get better at that role, because I like to learn. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs have this sort of insatiable desire to learn more. And because, as I said, I didn't know anything about hardware, but I've learned along the way, because I knew if I was going to move forward, you have to learn. And people who don't want to learn shouldn't launch companies. There's some facts like you stop learning after 50, that's bullshit. And in every year, I can honestly say I've learned so much. At that time, I knew that a CEO who wants things done fast and efficiently without mistakes. So I've got to find a way to get things prepped in certain ways and have people in the organization that I can lean on fast to get them. If I needed something from an entire organization with, let's say, 6,000 people, I had 2 people who were my go-tos, who knew that them servicing my request quickly built our relationship, and I gave them access. Maybe there were certain things that I could fear back that would help them, and they felt informed and they knew what's happening. So a lot of it comes down to relationships that helps us. And so when we met, like my go-to is not to be, I think there's enough sort of assholes in the world. I didn't want to be one. So I'm going to play it the way I know it. And if I'm stressed, I'll be like, sorry, I got to run. Thanks. Let's stay in touch. But I always gave anybody the time of day because I felt that was important, because that's who I am. And that was what I brought to the role. So people often said, wow, he's so chilled out. I wasn't always chilled out, but I just didn't feel like having stress on my shoulders when there was enough. Things will catch on fire all the time. I just can't pretend that I'm in it. I have to step back and solve them.
It's really interesting how there's a lot of people that they think they're okay, even though they maybe think they know inside they're not. But then your hair is starting to fall out, or a rash on your face, or your blood pressure shoots up. Your body, it will eventually tell you.
It's a lag too. So like you don't
Yeah,
catch it because you're like, oh, what happened? Then you look back 1 month, you're like, ah, that was my
yeah,
most stressful period on this one
yeah.
project.
So you then built your career, you learned everything, and you had this entrepreneurial like voice at the back thinking, I'm going to do something on my own. I've got my ideas book full of brilliant stuff that I'm squashing and lifting. And then you decide, I'm going to buy all these toothbrushes, take them apart, and I'm going to go on my own. What was the reality of that transition away from salary, structure, safety?
It's like being in an ocean and having to build a boat at the same time, right? So you got to swim and you got to build a raft. You just got to get really comfortable that as you build, things are still very uncertain. And so I guess that one other expression is if you're going to eat an elephant, you've got to start with the toes. You've got to start with the small bits and not worry about the big picture. If you go for the big picture, you won't get anywhere. More often than not, some of the founders don't make really good CEOs because like at that point, they're so far from the details and they're just figureheads and talking that like you need to know the details of the company inside out because you are the glue in the beginning.
Yeah.
But I would say as you build it, those details are the fundamentals of how that picture comes together. And so you have to get comfortable with the sort of vagueness. Now, the trick is that you have to know what are the parts that you can't rush through at certain phases and what are the parts that you can. And you get it wrong, right? So some parts I thought were less important and then I really regret them. And some parts we get right and you're like, oh yeah, I'm glad I did focus on that. That was important.
Can you give some of those examples? Because I'm sure some budding entrepreneurs or founders in their first few years are listening to this and thinking, okay, I'm so interested in how you went about it. What were those things that you got wrong that if you could go back, you'd maybe tweak a bit?
So I think the difficulty was that I was like, it's hardware. I didn't know where to start. And so I was fortunate to find like a partner that could help us. I didn't have a lot of money and that was a factor. I didn't want to spend a lot of money. I wanted to validate this. And so early on, what I got right, I think, is that we did a lot of consumer surveys. No, I did one with family and friends, and it's nice as motivation, but it doesn't give you as much insight as doing it with people who don't know you, right?
Mm.
And you've got to see through it because sometimes like our rush is thin, right? And in our consumer surveys, people were like, thin, that looks terrible. I don't like it. It's not going to perform well. And it's interesting because you could index on that's what people are saying, but you should just take it to communicate that. And so we did a lot of even ads on Meta to communicate different benefits, like a super sustainable toothbrush to slim and more powerful. We were able to find the right sort of balanced mix for our landing pages when we started. Then we started pre-sales. So that was one thing we got right. I think one thing I got wrong. Somebody told me this earlier on in our journey. It was like, oh, you're doing a hardware company. Okay, make sure you hire a bunch of engineers. And I was like, oh, that's funny. We've got 5 marketing people, but we don't have any engineers. And I later on realized as you scale hardware, it's so important. Like quality is the essence of it. And factories can't be trusted at the early levels. Quality is so important. And the factory that is working with you making 5 to 10,000 units a month is going to let you down. And somebody else told me, 2 people told me this actually. One person was like, you need to have a contract that when things go wrong, they don't just refund you. There's a damage clause because they have to feel the pain just like you. It's your brand. And I didn't do that. Now we've learned and moved on. But those are some of the things like most over. I was like, I just want to get to market. I just want to make it. But then you realize that like hardware is so important. Those surveys, coming back to a positive, were a big enabler for us in making what I call a minimal lovable product. Right? There's so many brands out there today that can take something that's available on Alibaba, put some nice muted branding around it and sell it, but it's not very differentiated because factories just want to make what they've always made because that's efficiency. Whereas that's not real innovation to consumers. They'll be like, oh, I've seen that already. It looks like every other Russian market. That was a big thing for us. How are we going to be differentiated and drive that? And that's been part of our success. I was desperate for a co-founder because I had worked prior to taking my staycation at a company called Mirma Ventures, and I had helped them on some startups that they had acquired and helped turn them around, but I was doing it by myself. It's lonely at the top and there's a lot of work to be done and you need somebody who can bounce off with you. And otherwise you bring a lot of that home. And some people are very good at being like, I can do this myself. I knew I wanted somebody to bounce off with and to get ideas and to divide and conquer because there's so much to be done. And that when you're starting out, yeah, you just need to be able to divide and conquer to some degree. I'd say a lot of the times my co-founder and I, we worked together and overlapped in the beginning, but you just need to find your path to it. But I did look at things like, I don't know, findacofounder.com. And I was desperate for one because how do you find a co-founder, right? Like you've got to, it's a bit of fate. It's a bit of like hoping and wishing. And I went for a walk with my co-founder, Mark. We were friends. We weren't best friends, which I think really helps. Like we were friends. And I was just talking to him and I started telling him about the idea and SURI and what I was working on. And I was playing really hard to get because I was like, you know what, maybe he could be my co-founder. And he was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't really want a co-founder. I'll probably just do this myself. We'll see. But here, I'll send you my deck. You let me know what you think. Next day, he calls back. He's like, wow, this looks great. I'm totally in. I'd love to help you on this. Oh, really? Why don't we work together for 5 weeks and see how it goes? And 5 weeks turned into, let's extend it to 10 weeks and let's sign this, make this deal happen. And so I was fortunate to have found him. We are very complementary in the sense that we don't agree on anything sometimes, but that's a good thing, right? No, I mean that we have very different types of behaviors and skill sets, which is what you want. If we're the same, then we're not really adding value. So that's how I found him. And I attribute it to partly luck, right? And so he had the same ambition as me, right? He had he sold one of his companies and that was perfect time for him.
What was going on there when you were playing hard to get? What was the underlying emotion behind that?
I don't want to say desperation, but I just, when you want something, like there's a fear that like if you push too hard, it won't happen.
Yeah.
And so co-founders, it's like it's not intimate, but it's almost like when you start things, they're like almost like a baby. So there's this sort of like emotional connection to it that you put, like it is the nucleus you want to protect and grow. And so you're a bit like trying to play hard to get also because you want to protect the nucleus. That's probably why I did it. And I thought it'd be a winning strategy. And I was right. Yeah.
You were.
It was.
Is it frightening giving a bit of the control? Is that frightening, letting go a little bit of it?
I would say no. My co-founder would say yes. I am a control freak. I think in the beginning it is because you know how you built it and you don't want somebody to come in. My co-founder is an extreme extrovert. I'm probably introvert, semi-introvert. He loves pitching like nobody's business, and he's a great person at pitching. But it's really interesting because in the beginning, when we were talking to early investors, he was just letting me do the pitching, and it was like, because he was listening. And now, as we moved on in future rounds, he loves doing the pitching. So it's amazing how it's evolved. But I think that's normal in a way, right? You need to know everything before. And I think that was his way of saying, let me get the information, then I can play to my strengths with it.
Yeah. What happens when you get pissed off with one another? There's tensions. How do you navigate that?
I think the number 3 reason why startups break up is co-founders fall apart. Let's just let that sink in. Number 1 is they run out of cash. Number 2 is bad market fit. Number 3, co-founders can't get along. You wouldn't think that would be the number 3 reason, but it is. I would say we are very different people, and coming to terms with that and still working on it today, because I think it gets better, but it never goes away, the differences. And that's okay. Like we've come to accept it, and it's what makes us stronger. We all come from different settings, like whether we want to admit it or not. Like parents are different, locations can be different. I was born in New York. He was born in Brunei. His parents were Welsh. He lived in Scotland for most of his life. So there's quite a lot of differences we had just from our settings. Like before we say how's this individual and how's their chemistry and how do they think, upbringing settings are different. And we just had to, a lot of times I think the communication is missing. And so when you're building on stuff, things build up. And one day I give credit to him. He was, oh, hey, can we just have a meeting on this Friday? Because we were on Zoom all the time at the beginning. Yeah. And because we couldn't meet. And so I'd leave my camera on, go get lunch, go to the bathroom, whatever. And then I just continue working because we just needed to talk together so much. We couldn't spend the day in the office. So the Zoom was always on. And I think it's probably that's what started a lot of early frustrations. It's hard to do everything over video chat. And so one Friday morning, he was like, hey, can I just talk to you for a minute about things? He's like, can you just tell me like how you think things are going? And is anything not working? I was like, things are fine. What do you mean? He's like, really? And I was like, yeah, is there anything you want to share? He's like, okay, let me share some things. And he was like, I didn't think that's working. This is not working. I didn't like it when you said that in a meeting. It sounded like you were disagreeing with me. You mentioned those. I didn't like it when you did this. And it was like, that was refreshing that we let everything on the table. And the interesting thing wasn't that we were both bitching at each other, although we were. Was the way we were doing it was to understand why things were bothering each other. And then
Yeah.
when we got to the root of it, I was like, you asked me to to look at the job description. So of course I edited the whole thing because I thought you wanted my help. His interpretation was you didn't think I did a good job on the job description, so you
Yeah.
redid it for me. And I was like, I thought I was helping you there. Oh, okay. Next time you don't want me, when you ask for my opinion, you mean like verbally, what do I think? Could it be better? Cool, got
Yeah.
it. Or when you said that in an investor meeting, I think you said it the wrong way because you said it over what I was saying and that makes it look bad. I didn't think of that. That's a good idea. But just getting to understand some of the differences, then you find that actually it's often not what's bothering somebody is not what your intention was. And so when you can resolve that, you get to the first level of, okay, now we know what we're doing. Entrepreneurs, you want the same thing. Like we both want to do this, grow really successfully, become a household name. That's
Yeah.
clear. Let's agree on that. Yeah, we agree. Then the sort of the ways we get there in the past, they might be different ways, but if we can say, you're going to come in that way, I'm going to go that way. As a result, we're both going to go that way.
Yeah.
And you've acknowledged that, then it's much better than us going like this and crashing into each other. Because then you
Yeah.
can't wield it to go further. So it's still with things we work on. We get feedback from our team. We just got a whole bunch of feedback from our team saying we still give different opinions on things. And so we try to work on it, but we're like, oh yeah, that's not a different opinion. We agree on that. They just heard it in different ways.
Context is everything, and understanding another person's world and where they're coming from and how they saw those things, that and not taking those personally. I think communication, if leaders can get that and not see it as a defense and confrontation, but actually really healthy, it can make or break a business.
Aligning on the priorities is important, and reiteration is important, because you could say it once, say it twice. You need to say it 20 times for people to get it across the organization. Otherwise, they just go, oh, I heard that, but didn't you mean this? And I'd say across the board. So that's a big learning that we've been growing. It's like, how do you stay consistent in your communication? Reiteration is something you have to never lose an opportunity to reiterate a point.
Yeah. I just read your impact report last night. I was so impressed by how you're scaling in the couple of years, your transparency. A big part of it that I was drawn to, yes, the sustainability, the performance, everything you're doing for the climate, but with the people. And you got voted, I think it was Sunday Times, one of the best places to work in the UK in 2025. What was important to you about the culture you guys created?
That's a great question. I would say, like, for us, we like to work hard and have fun. And like, right, like every startup doesn't always come out that way, right? We know that. Like sometimes people are working too hard, and that is the reality of startup. You're carrying many hats. And so I'm fortunate to think that everybody enjoys working for us. Like they see the fruit of their efforts, and that's the kind of people we want to recruit. I always used to joke saying, join us, the coffee sucks. Hey, isn't the best in the world, right? It's good, but it's not the best. And the main thing you have going for you is you're going to learn 3 times to 5 times faster than you would anywhere else. And if you decide to leave us, you're probably going to do bigger and better than if you didn't join us. And that was our pitch. Today, we're about 50 employees. And still to this day, like people are learning very fast. That hasn't gone away. We've got more structure, more hierarchy. Obviously, when you go from 4 or 5 people to 50, you have to build that. And there's more processes. Processes are a good evil in the sense you need it, but you need to not let it control your company because it's really dangerous. And I think that we've been able to maintain the culture because we're very transparent and honest about our shortcomings. And we hired an independent HR company, put on feedback sessions for all of us where we openly listened to the right way to give feedback, because feedback can be really corrosive if it's done badly, right? If you give feedback short and aggressive, it's corrosive. It doesn't help anything. It comes from a place of caring, but it's not actionable. It's fluffy, right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you not wait too long and give that feedback, but not do it in a group setting because nobody wants to hear you giving feedback in front of other people. Pull me aside and say, hey, Gyve, when you said that in a meeting, that really upset me because I thought that wasn't clear and I've been working on this for 2 weeks. And in which case I might say, thank you for letting me know that. I didn't think it was clear either. Let's realign on the stuff before we present it, because like then I'll be on your side, or I think it needs to be done this way and I probably could have not done it in the meeting. So we're both at fault. Best thing is to listen to feedback. So, and we've been transparent about that, right? That we need to learn and progress. And I think that's why people still enjoy working for us and the mission that we have. And we're doing some really cool stuff. So I love coming to work. My co-founder does too. And I like to think a lot of people do too. And we have nobody who's ever left our company who's screw those guys, they're assholes. And that's because even if it was dismissal we've had to make, we've been honest about it. Honesty is like the one thing that you can't deny, that people will always respect you for, because trust. We say trust actually is Before feedback, we called it trust, right? If you trust me enough to be able to pull me aside and have a conversation with me, then I will be fair and take feedback to tell you what I'm thinking. Because that's how my relationship was built with Mark. And so I think it stems from the founders, and then it needs to flourish in the organization.
Yeah. And there you sort of touched upon having to have tricky conversations. And it makes me think about the fact when I met you, you were the doer. You had a lot of responsibility. You were very senior, but you were doing a lot. And now you're leading. How's that felt for you, becoming the one in charge?
So in the beginning, I was still very much a doer, and I don't do so much now. I probably stopped doing, I'm not gonna lie, we're almost 4 years old, half a year ago, like maybe a little bit more. And it's really hard. And it's something that I even talked to my co-founder about. We ultimately don't want to be doing as a lot right now. I need to be delegating as much as possible so I have capacity to look at the broader vision and enable it. It's very hard, that transition, and nobody talks about that. You don't go from doing to leading overnight. I still get so many emails from inbox from early days. I don't know, because I set up everything, right? So I don't know, the mailbox room still copies me on everything. I don't know, some other report still copies me on everything. It's hard to transition, but you need to start forcing it and trusting the people that you have. I think there's a difference in terms of when you move from executing to leading. This sort of, there's a nuance. We're still very early stage. I'm still very much in the details, but I need to not be doing it. I need to be getting the updates and then proposing back solutions or approving decisions. Sometimes things will drop, people will leave, and nobody can close that gap except me, because I've done it.
Yeah.
And so it's okay for me to pick it up in the short term. At least I tell myself that. But I really need to have a plan to get out of there pretty quickly, because that eats my time with everything else. Hopefully we don't run into those situations, but sometimes they're unavoidable.
Yeah. I work with a few leaders who are finding it, oh, but I need to be involved in this because it's actually quicker if I just do it. And less mistakes will happen. And actually, I'm scared that A, B, and C over there won't get it right and we'll lose that client. And my question is, okay, by saying yes to that over there, what are you saying no to? And it's a really good way to put a pause in place for them to go, actually, no, this is not, I have to leave them to make these mistakes and learn. You said that earlier, and give them the autonomy to flourish. And yeah, shit will happen. But actually, I need to
People
focus on
in
the
our
strategy.
company who are moving into more senior positions and growing fast, as I mentioned, they want autonomy. They don't want the CEO kind of sitting on their shoulders all the time. And so learning to not pick at everything is something that you need to develop as a skill.
Yeah.
I would also say that it's really hard for me not to mean like product. Whenever we launch a product, I'm all over it. But what I've learned to is to put it into phases. You guys go and sprint and present it to me. I'll give you some inputs. I keep going and sprinting, rather than go and sprint for a while, come back and I'm totally upset. Or not upset, but I'm like not aligned to what's been done. And then there's rework and frustration.
When I did my intro earlier, I was talking about 2022, a year, I think it was 1.7 was your revenue. And then follow on 2 years later, it was 23.4 million. What's the reality underneath that? What's the pressure involved in scaling at that pace?
Excitement, for sure. Like, I think we did it because we were excited. We did $1 million profit in that year too. For a hardware company in its third year hitting profit, like I've had friends in hardware businesses like, people proud of you enough internally on that? And I was like, but we also we relaxed it, because what came with that was a lot of hard work and us feeling like we can do anything. For perspective, we were about 15 people then. And the next year we moved to 40, which we needed to be bigger based on that much revenue we're bringing in. And I think when you double in size, one of the sort of things I've always heard, and I lived it, was breaks. So like, you thought you had a process, but it was really just you sat next to each other. You could talk to the next person in a line. When layers come in, teams that naturally doesn't like continue. You need meetings and processes, and people don't fully get into their roles until at least half a year. And so you had these hopes, cool, you're just going to incrementally add revenue, go. And so that broke a bit, I would say, definitely. But we pulled it back on track. One of the things that I've never really liked meetings, but we sprawled out on meetings, so many meetings. When I was like, cool, meeting principles. We will not have meetings for these 5 reasons. If it's a decision, there'll be a meeting. And that just cleaned out like 55% of everybody's calendar, because we all thought we needed to meet and present stuff, which I was like, that's silly. Send slides, let us read it, and then we can talk about this decision. I would say that there's the scaling part. So you asked what it's like. It's not easy when you scale with people, But generally there's a goal that like we're doing something cool and different and that we need big, hairy, ambitious targets that we can go after. And as things get harder, you're like, get these targets, like the challenges get better. But I like to think that as a team, we think the challenges are opportunities, right? People enjoy what they're doing, the excitement, the products we're coming out with are really cool. With 2 new products this year, launching 2 new platforms. And we launched that brush that you have in September last year. It feels nice. And we launched a new color in February. So Canyon Sunrise, which is our new red brush that is exclusive in Target in the US. And so new things are happening. And when new things are happening, people enjoy the hustle, I think. Like it keeps the momentum high.
I do feel like there's something that must sit under that. And maybe that's a preconception from my side, but pressure for a founder and from people I've worked with of the juggle of it all, because you're a dad to 2 beautiful young daughters. You're a husband. You are a man who has needs and hopefully has some life outside of work. Plus, I don't know about your parents. A lot of entrepreneurs I'm working with have aging parents, young children, the pressures. Plus, you're running a successful multi-million pound business. How are you juggling that? How are you navigating that?
I think it goes back to my learning about juggling too many things at once. I moved to London, I got a new job. And when I started SURI, I was very intentional. This is what I want to do. And then when we had our first child, I was like, that's also what I want to do. And I realized, and I was like, I'm going to do these 2 things perfectly. I'm going to be a great parent. I'm going to launch a company too, and have my 3rd child, my co-founder, right? And as I did it, I was getting joy from both of them. The reality is like, I couldn't uphold the friend part, right? Like I generally had no life, right? Like young kids, anybody will tell you already don't have a life. Sorry to break it to the new parents that don't have or about to have kids, but that's something that I think if we told everybody, nobody would have kids. So you lose your life pretty quickly, especially with 2 kids, right? Like it's double the trouble and the love. But I was okay with that. Already enough in my 20s and 30s. I was ready for this. The problem is you don't get to see a lot of good friends. And so now I'm just starting. They come around. I still would try to text them. My WhatsApps are terrible. Like I've got 180 unread. And I try to let people know, I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm such a terrible person, but I don't have time to meet friends. And I come home and I've got my daughter and I'm with my 2 of them until they go to bed. At bed, it's 8:30. I'm eating dinner and I'm exhausted. Weekends, it's like mommy and daddy daycare, right? So we are running around having fun with them because we don't get to see them that much during the week. I can't go out for dinner very easily. I also have to think if I want to go out with friends for dinner, my wife's going to be staying, she's working. And if that's going to happen, then how many other nights do I have for work dinners, which are also important with investors and things, right? Like I get invited to a lot of dinners with investors. And when you're in between rounds, as we are, it's important to go to them to stay in contact with them, right? Because there's a responsibility to the company and public appearances that you have at one point. As PR in itself, you can't avoid that stuff. And so there's only so many evenings you have free a month. And then you've got to be able to balance it. I'm not doing a good enough job. My physical health has deteriorated as a result of being a parent of 2. But I also think you have to expect it as a transition. My youngest daughter is 2 years old. And so now I'm getting more into health stuff because I'm like, I've got a little bit more time. I can do this. And so you just have to accept that there's a period and not let it go too long and then try to rebuild it back to your personal life. But I would say trying to do all at once, not that easy. And any co-founder, any entrepreneur will tell you like, yeah, of course I had no personal life during these periods or that went out, but I was happy enough to accept that circumstance. Like there's a work-life balance and my life is my kids right now. I'm building in more of a personal life slowly.
But it is about boundaries and shifting those boundaries based on what phase you're in. And do you have, so for anyone that's watching in, that's feeling like they are in every single direction, but wanting to prioritize their family a bit more, their health some more, like what boundary do you put in place to protect that time with your daughters? How do you stop it bleeding into one another?
It's a really good point. So I'm pretty strict on that. I know maybe it's my wife giving me the look. I'm like, oh, I don't want to get that look. I try to be very cognizant of that. I can't not be around my kids for long periods of time. I don't want to be that parent. My co-founder has a harder time because he's traveling to retailers in the US quite a lot and pitching to them. So he manages all of our retail. And so I do a lot more of the direct to sales channel online. I can do that from without having to travel a lot. And it's really not that easy. So just being like, I'll make time for it is not always the reality. I try to be strict on it. And really scrutinize anything I do at night. So I'm like, Is this a really important event? Is it really good? Could I miss it? Could somebody else on my team go if I can't make it?
Yeah.
That's some of the choices that I make.
I just want to finish off by asking what's next for you. So what does good look like for you? And then what's next for SURI? What does good look like for SURI?
I like that. More often than not, it's what's for the company. They often forget the entrepreneur, right? So
No.
it's for me good. Continuing to find balance. I'm constantly growing, and I think I forget sometimes that I need to accept that and be proud of that. Whereas often we're not proud of the learning side, like the shortcomings that we are overcoming. Like we want to be everything to everyone, or we want to be the perfect leader that's been doing it for 20 years. I was at a dinner last night. A CEO of a company worth 150 billion was talking, and he was so humble. I'm introverted. I hate public speaking. I'm just terrible at it. And he was able to talk. He's like, yeah, you look at me now. I'm able to host this dinner and talk through the whole thing. You don't know the amount of practice I've had in the therapy and I love learning, but it took time to get here.
Yeah.
And it was really refreshing for me because I was like, oh yeah, that's interesting. I've seen those moments. Like, but it's good to know that like with practice, learning, you can continue to achieve anything. And so for me, it's being a little bit more forgiving on the shortcomings and building the solutions to the next step and being proud of that, right? Like I am growing every day and I'm getting bigger and better and spending more direct time with my family. Like I'm trying to buy these wooden trays everywhere, not have it in my pocket. So something urgent, like I've got an Apple Watch, it'll ring and I'll be like, take it or don't take it. But like you naturally just like pick up your phone, do other stuff. So that's one thing I'm going to try to do personally. And then obviously get back into health. And then on the company, I would say continuing to grow our culture and our results and trying to maintain both. But we've got some really big, hairy targets that we want to do. And I'm really excited to just smash out of the park with the team and to build our team as we evolve to sort of SURI 3.0 and to see where we can go from there.
Yeah. I am so excited for you. You've created such an exciting business. I can't wait to brush my teeth. Such a strange thing to say.
My goodness.
And before we came online, you should all know that you gave me a sort of demonstration on how to brush my teeth. So just in case I hadn't learned after 33 years. So I'm very excited.
And every brush is different, right?
There we go.
Well, you have great teeth. So SURI will just go hand in hand.
Yeah, a bit in the yellow stage. Thank you so much. Your honesty, transparency, your balls, like your drive to just make stuff happen. You're bold and you stuck to your entrepreneurial instinct. And despite being told no, sometimes you're just like, no, I'm still doing this. And I think that's so inspiring for anyone watching this. It certainly inspired me. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.